بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. So today we are on lesson number 52. This is the 52nd lesson on the book Al-Uboodiyyah of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. In the previous lesson, the Shaykh spoke about the fitrah, which is that which Allah Azza wa Jal has created all of mankind, and every child is born upon the fitrah. Every child knows innately and recognizes that it has a creator, it has a Lord, and it recognizes that there are many favors and benefits and bounties which it enjoys, for which it has to be grateful, and it's drawn towards worshipping Allah, and it's drawn towards accepting what is true, and it's drawn towards accepting what's beneficial, right? This is the basic fitrah that Allah Azza wa Jal has created the whole of mankind. And this fitrah obviously naturally leads to Islam. We mentioned that verse in the Quran, فِطْرَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي فَطَرَ النَّاسَ عَلَيْهَا, that this is the fitrah of Allah upon which He created mankind. لَا تَبْدِيلَ لِخَلْقِ اللَّهِ. There is no change in the creation of Allah. So Ibn Taymiyyah spoke about that, and Shaykh al-Fawzan commented upon all of that. The gist of basically which is that the fitrah is Islam, and Islam is to single out Allah in worship, to abandon the worship of all false gods, and Islam brings unity of mankind, whereas shirk leads to disunity of mankind, right? So if you abandon worshipping Allah alone, if all of mankind worships only Allah, then all of mankind is together. But as soon as some people turn away and they deviate from the fitrah, and they turn to worshipping men, worshipping trees, worshipping idols, worshipping the stars, the moon, the sun, the rocks, the animals, the elephants, or whatever it might be, then you see mankind splitting and differing into different creeds and different things like that. So fitrah, Islam, unity. That was the general thing that we spoke of. And then Ibn Taymiyyah mentioned how Ibrahim alayhi salam, he is the Imam of the Muwahhideen. Ibrahim alayhi salam, he is the Imam of the people of Tawheed. And Allah Azza wa Jal makes for the people of Tawheed A'imma, leaders, right? So the prophets of Bani Israel, right? They are Imams of guidance, and likewise all the way through to the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who is the greatest leader and the greatest prophet and the greatest messenger. And likewise, for the people of disbelief, He makes for them Imams and leaders in disbelief. And from them is Fir'aun. Right? Fir'aun is a leader of misguidance who leads people towards the hellfire. So anyway, after all of that discussion, the point that we were discussing at the very end was this, which is that the mistake of these people is that if you do not distinguish between what Allah loves and is pleased with and what He decrees to happen, right? What He decrees to happen. If you do not distinguish between these two, that's going to lead you in a series of steps to even greater misguidance, right? So in other words, I'll give some examples to illustrate the point. So some people might say that I'm drinking alcohol, and if Allah had wanted anything else, He would have prevented me from drinking alcohol. But because I'm drinking alcohol, this means Allah must like what I'm doing. He must be pleased with what I'm doing. right? So this way of thinking, what's the mistake in this way of thinking? What's wrong here, right? Or it could be someone saying that, I'm going to rob and cheat and steal from people to enrich myself. And if Allah wanted it any other way, He would have willed that. But because that's what my decree is, then it means Allah is pleased for this for me, right? So what's wrong with this way of thinking is that this person hasn't distinguished between what is it that Allah loves and is pleased with, what are the things Allah is, He actually loves and is pleased with, and what are the things that He simply allows to happen by way of His qadr, by way of His decree, right? Because everything we see in the creation happening, there are good things, there are evil things, there are people who disbelieve, there are people who believe, there are people who do righteous deeds, there are people who do evil deeds. All of these things, the good and the evil, is from al-qadr, right? Allah is willing and allowing those things to happen. But does that mean He's automatically pleased and happy with everything He allows to happen? And the answer is no. No, right? So this mistake here, when you make this mistake, when you basically try to argue that whatever happens in al-qadr is automatically liked by Allah and that it's one and the same thing, right? This is a starting point of misguidance, right? When you start off with this false idea and you follow it through, all the way through to the end, what this will lead to is even greater disbelief, right? Or not even greater disbelief, but it leads to that which is disbelief, right? Even though this thing in itself, it leads to that which is disbelief. What does it lead to? It will lead to a person not knowing the difference between the creator and the created, right? So if you start off not knowing the difference between a shara is Allah's legislation, what He's pleased with, right? What He commands you, what He's pleased with. That's the legislation. If you don't distinguish between that and between al-qadr is what everything that takes place in Allah's creation. If you can't distinguish between these two, then that mistake is going to lead you in a series of steps where eventually you are not going to distinguish between the creator and the created. The creator and the created. You're going to treat them all to be just one. Right? Just like you've treated Allah's love to be all one, that Allah loves the good and the evil, Allah loves whatever takes place, He loves it because He's allowed it to happen, right? Then that mistake is going to lead you eventually to seeing that Allah is everything and everything is Allah, and there's no distinction between the creator and between the created, right? And this is not something theoretical. This is something that actually happened in Islamic history, right? This is something that actually happened in Islamic history, that people eventually went to that extreme where they basically said, everything is Allah and I can't tell the difference. Am I the Lord or am I the servant? Am I the worshipped or am I the worshipper? Right? People fell into that level of disbelief. So this was the point upon which we finished the previous lesson. So today's lesson starts from this point onwards. So now that this basic idea is clear to you, Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he then he starts speaking about these people, right? These people who fell into this type of mistake. And so he says, وَيَقُولُ مُحَقِّقُوهُمْ الشَّرِيعَةُ فِيهَا طَاعَةٌ وَمَعْصِيَةٌ وَالْحَقِيقَةُ فِيهَا مَعْصِيَةٌ بِلَا طَاعَةٍ وَالتَّحْقِيقُ لَيْسَ فِيهِ طَاعَةٌ وَلَا مَعْصِيَةٌ. So basically here, all he's describing is three groups of people, right? There are three groups of people. And these are people who are people from the Sufiya, right, who fell into this mistake. And he says that the Sheikh says, the first group are those people whom they call Ahlul Sharia, right? And so what these people are saying is there's the general common people like you and I, right? And we adhere to the Sharia commands, we follow what is commanded, we keep away from what is prohibited. So what they do is they call us, we are the people who are sticking to the Sharia, to the outward things, right? These are the people of the Sharia, right? And they treat them here at the lowest level, meaning that these are just simple people. They're like simpletons, and the only thing they can really grasp and understand is to do what is obedience to Allah, keep away from what is disobedience to Allah, and they need this in their lives to basically get along and get by, and that's the only thing they're able to understand, right? So basically they're treating the people who stick to the Sharia to be kind of really like simpleton, basic, common people, and they need this in their life. They need commands and prohibitions to regulate their life, right? And to bring order and morality to their life, right? That's the first group. This is what they call Ahlul Sharia. Ahlul Sharia, right? For them is the concept of obedience and disobedience. Then the second group are those people, they say, look, for these people, there's no such thing as disobedience for them. Everything they do is actually obedience to Allah, right? So for example, if a person goes and he commits fornication, he drinks, he steals, he cheats, right? This is actually being obedient to Allah. Why? Because of the mistake that we mentioned earlier. You can't distinguish between what Allah loves and what is from His qadr. Do you understand? Like the argument that, well, whatever I'm doing, Allah must be pleased with it. So this person, to him, everything he is doing is obedience to Allah. Do you understand? On that false idea, right? So here a person would be saying, well, today I drank some alcohol, and I did this and I did that, and this is what Allah wanted from me. I have not disobeyed Allah at all. There's no disobedience in my actions because this is what Allah wanted from me. If Allah willed this to happen for me, then how could I do anything except to be in obedience to Allah? You understand the way of thinking here, right? So here they say these types of people, these are the people who are obedient to Allah. There's no concept of disobedience here at all. It doesn't even exist for these people. All right? So this clearly you can start to see the actual misguidance here. So as the Shaykh says, حتى ولو كان زنا أو سرق لأنه مقدر على العبد. So even if this was things like, he steals and he fornicates and he does things like this, because his argument is, look, Allah decreed this to happen upon me, so how can I do anything except to obey Allah? This is obedience to Allah. So therefore the concept of disobedience doesn't even exist. So these people now are greater in level, they are more in perfection than us poor common people at the bottom who are just basically, we are, doing the commanded and we're keeping away from the prohibited, right? This is how they are basically thinking. Then they have the third level, right? So the first people are the Ahlul Sharia, The second level are known as the Al-Khasa, the elite or the special people. This is the group that we are talking about now. And then the third group, the third level, are those whom they call Khasatul Khasa, meaning the elite of the elite, the more special of the special. And with these people, they are known as Ahlul Tahqiq. And what this means is that the very idea of there being obedience and disobedience doesn't even exist in the first place. There's not even a concept of obedience to Allah and disobedience to Allah. Why? Because these things no longer apply to them. Because they have reached such a level of status that to even say, oh, that's obedience to Allah, or that's disobedience to Allah, that concept doesn't even exist in the first place. So it doesn't even apply, right? And obviously this is because they believe everything is Allah. Allah is everything. There's no distinction between the creator and the created. Therefore, there is no halal, there is no haram, there is no sin, there is no disobedience, there is no obedience. These concepts totally disappear because why? Somehow you've come to realize the alleged truth, the alleged truth that nobody else could really grasp apart from you, that everything is Allah and Allah is everything, right? So these people obviously fell into tremendous misguidance when they started off initially upon the idea that whatever happens in Allah's decree, Allah automatically loves it. So when you start from this premise here, you are going to end up over here where these people have ended up, right? And after this, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he goes on to mention, he says, مثال ذلك اسم الفناء. He goes on to illustrate this by way of a word, right? This is one of the key terms and words in Sufism, in Tasawwuf, and it's called al-fana. Al-fana. Al-fana is a word which means to perish, right? To perish, to dissolve, to disappear, right? To end, al-fana, to expire, right? And to come to an end, al-fana. And before we continue, obviously this is something very, very important to us as Muslims in a general sense, which is that words and the meanings of words are very, very important, because we can be deceived and we can be misguided if we don't understand words with their proper meanings, right? You can take a word, like, let me give you an example. Like if I took the word wine, if I said wine, right? And you know what the meaning is attached to that, and you know what the Sharia ruling is upon that, right? You know that it intoxicates, and you know it's haram, right? But if I came along and I changed the name and I said, it's actually called liberation, freedom, right? So I've now added a meaning to something which you would think that there's something actually good in this because it's going to liberate me and free me, right? So you can play games with words and put meanings into words which could be totally false, right? And this type of thing is the way in which, in many different ways, it can lead people far, far astray. And we know this has happened in history where, the word ta'wil, for example, what is the meaning of the word ta'wil? We know that it means tafsir, explanation. But the people of innovation have used that word ta'wil for something else, right? With a meaning that's not really known, right? So these things, and likewise, this can happen in law, in legal affairs, it can happen in creed, it can happen in so many different issues. So the point being, and this is what we're going to illustrate now, Ibn Taymiyyah is going to illustrate this important point by way of this example, right? The word al-fana, مثال ذلك اسم الفنا. The example of that is the noun known as called al-fana. Al-fana. Al-fana means to perish, to dissolve, to kind of expire, to end. Ibn Taymiyyah says al-fana is of three types. There's three types. There's a type which is for the prophets and the awliya, a type which is for the prophets and the awliya, and there is a type which is those who are from the righteous people who seek the truth, and there's a third type which is the type of the hypocrites and the atheists and those who resemble them, right? So in other words, if you take this word al-fana, you can give it three different meanings or three different interpretations. And depending on which interpretation you understand from this word will determine which group you're in. I mean, you could be from the prophets and messengers, if it's a particular correct meaning. You could be from a second group or a third group, right? Based upon what this word means to you, right? So now Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah is going to mention the first correct meaning of the term al-fana, right? If we hear this word al-fana, right, we can go back to the Quran and the Sunnah and derive a correct understanding of what this word means. Now he explains it. He says, فَأَمَّا الْأَوَّلِ, as for the first type, it is, and he defines it in a sentence, al-fana an iradati ma siwa Allah. Al-fana an iradati ma siwa Allah. Basically what this means very simply means that every desire or wish that you have, it all expires and finishes and ends except that which is for Allah. Very simple, right? Meaning that in yourself you have no desire, you have no irada, you have no wish, you have no, your heart is not turning to anything except for Allah. That's the only irada that you have. That's the only thing that you are seeking. Which means therefore that every other irada, it perishes. Yes? Right? Every other irada, every other wish, every other desire, it perishes. So for example, you might have, every irada, every desire for wanting to sin, it perishes, it's gone. Right? Every irada for, something which is permissible, it's lawful, it's mubah, but it's just frivolity and, whatever, and you're not interested in any of that, right? You are only seeking Allah Azza wa Jal, and every other desire, every other wish, every other irada, it basically perishes, right? This is what the meaning is here. So then Ibn Taymiyyah clarifies and explains. He says, بِحَيْثُ لَا يُحِبُّ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. So you love only Allah. وَلَا يَعْبُدُ إِلَّا إِيَّاهِ. And he worships only Allah. وَلَا يَتَوَكَّلْ إِلَّا عَلَيْهِ. And he makes tawakkul only upon Allah. وَلَا يَطْلُبُ غَيْرَهُ. And he's not in pursuit of anything besides him. Right? This is the meaning. This is the correct meaning. Right? So when you say al-fana, that I'm entered into a state of al-fana, I've entered into the state of perishing. What do you mean? You mean basically every other desire, every other wish for things besides Allah, they've all perished and they've all gone. And the only thing I seek is only Allah Azza wa Jal. Right? This meaning is true. This is a true meaning. So when you say al-fana, perishing, and you mean this meaning, this is actually correct. It is in line with the Quran and with the Sunnah. And this is how the prophets, the best of the prophets and the messengers, this is how they are described, right? As Ibn Taymiyyah says, there's a well-known Sheikh Abu Yazid, حيث قال أريد ألا أريد إلا ما يريد. Right? Basically, it's like another sentence by which you can summarize this whole thing. This person, he said, I wish that I do not desire except what He, meaning Allah, desires. Right? Meaning, I wish for myself that I do not desire except what He desires. So in other words, what you're saying here is that I hope that the only thing that emanates in my heart of love and of wish and of desiring things, that the only things I want, that my heart ever feels the desire for, is basically only what Allah desires and wants. So in other words, your irada is in line with what Allah wants and loves and is pleased with. And everything outside of that, it perishes and it destroys and it expires and it goes. Right? So this meaning here is a correct and a true meaning, right? Meaning that, the perfection, وَكَمَالُ الْعَبْدِ أَنْ لَا يُرِيد وَلَا يُحِبْ وَلَا يَرْضَى إِلَّا مَا أَرَادَهُ اللَّهُ وَرَضِيَهُ وَأَحَبَّهُ. Right? It simply means that a servant does not desire, he does not love, he does not become pleased with anything except that which Allah loves, Allah is pleased with, Allah is pleased with, and what He wants. And what is that? Very simple. وَهُوَ مَا أَمَرَ بِهِ أَمْرَ إِجَابٍ أَوْ إِسْتِحْبَابٍ. It's very simple. It is whatever Allah commanded, which is either wajib or mustahab. Right? So this now makes the meaning clear to us, right? Basically, if in your heart the only thing you want and you pursue and you desire is what is wajib or mustahab and nothing else, then everything else has perished. This is the state of al-fana, right? Where the only thing you have irada for is whatever Allah wants from His servants and He likes it, which is the wajib and the mustahab. Right? These are the two things that define what it is that Allah loves and wants from His servants. Whatever is wajib and whatever is mustahab. So, a servant, therefore, he does not love except what Allah loves and what He recommends and what He made wajib. And obviously from that as well, that you love the angels, you love the prophets, you love the righteous. Right? So, when you are like this, which is obviously the prophets and the messengers are like this, they are the most superior, then this is the meaning of the verse in the Quran, إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. Right? The verse of the Quran in Surah Al-Shu'ara, Surah 26, verse 86, which means, except the one who comes to Allah with a heart which is salim, which is sound, which is safe. It is a safe and sound heart, right? Except the one who comes to Allah on the Day of Judgment with a sound, salim heart. This is the meaning of that verse, right? That you come to Allah on the Day of Judgment having been a person in whose heart there was no desire for anything except what Allah desires, what He loves, what He's pleased with, which is only the wajib and the mustahab. And everything else, every other desire, it basically perished. Right? So this is the correct and true meaning of this word al-fana. Al-fana. And this heart, as-salim mimma siwallah. The heart which is safe from anything and everything which is besides Allah. Right? Your heart is safe from being captivated by this thing and being captivated by that sin, right? Or being captivated by... Your heart is free from all of that. Or the heart is free from worshipping anything besides Allah. Or your heart is free from anything that is outside of the wish and the irada of Allah. Or that your heart is free from, except for the mahabba, the love of Allah, right? So all of these meanings, as you've seen, by now you should have a very clear understanding that this word al-fana, which literally means like to perish and to expire, if this is what you mean, this is the sound, correct understanding derived from the Quran and from the Sunnah. This is what we call al-fana al-shar'i. Al-fana al-shar'i. This is the legislated type of, perishing that all of us should be striving to enact, right? That every other desire besides what Allah wants from us, that it perishes, expires, and it's gone, right? So this is straightforward. The second meaning, وَأَمَّا النَّوْءُ الثَّانِي, this is where we now start going into, where we start falling into potentially like mistakes, right? Where we deviate from the correct and true meaning. The second, وَأَمَّا النَّوْءُ الثَّانِي فهو الفناء عن شهود السوى. فهو الفناء عن شهود السوى. What does this mean? Right. This means is that you enter into a state of being where you no longer are aware of anything around you. You don't observe anything around you, right? So let me just give you to understand this meaning. There's a verse in the Quran which Ibn Taymiyyah quotes. He says, this is the mother of Musa alayhi salam. And you know, when Musa alayhi salam was taken away from his mother, and he went to the court of Fir'aun, and obviously his mother didn't know, and then she happened to see the baby on one occasion, and she recognized, that's my son, right? And in that state of recognizing that's my son, she became overtaken by this state of, she became absorbed and fixated on her son Musa alayhi salam. And Allah Azza wa Jal describes the situation here in this verse. وَأَصْبَحَ فُؤَادُ أُمِّ مُوسَى فَارِغًا إِنْ كَادَتْ لَتُبْدِي بِهِ لَوْلَا أَرَّبَطْنَا عَلَى قَلْبِهَا. In this ayah Allah says, and the fu'ad of the mother of Musa, meaning the fu'ad, meaning here like the like the senses and the heart and the understanding and the awareness, right? It became empty, meaning that everything else that she could possibly have on her mind and to be thinking about, it completely left her heart, and the only thing she was fixed upon was, that's my son. She became overtaken and everything else was just forgotten, right? And then Allah Azza wa Jalla, He says, she almost revealed, like unknowingly, she almost revealed the fact that that is her son, and might have exposed and revealed the issue to Fir'aun and his people, or his, whoever it was, right? Had it not been that we gathered her heart together, right? So here there's a description of which people we experience the same thing as well. You probably know from your own experience that there's come to you something, you see something, or there's some news that's come to you, and you become completely absorbed by that one thing, and you are completely oblivious to everything that's around you or whoever's around you, and people could be speaking, and you're just completely so absorbed that you are not witnessing anything, you are not observing anything. The only thing that's there at that moment in time is just you and that thought. That's it, right? This is a state of being that people experience, and that can happen. So in this second type of al-fana, this is what happens here is you have certain like people who are worshippers, and their hearts become so engrossed and engaged in Allah's remembrance and His worship and loving Allah, right, that they become so absorbed and so engaged and so preoccupied in all of this that it's as if nothing in the world exists, right? There's like as if you refuse to witness that, as if there is anything outside of what you're doing of worship and dhikr and things like that, right? They become so absorbed, and they don't even realize that there's things happening in the world, or there's other things outside of what they are doing. So they become kind of so absorbed in this thing. So so the Shaykh goes on, and he says, he goes on to explain. He says this happens to people when they become engrossed by a particular emotion, right? Imma hub wa imma khawf wa imma raja, right? يبقي قلبه منصرفا عن كل شيء إلا عما قد أحبه أو خافه أو طلبه بحيث يكون عند استغراقه في ذلك لا يشعر بغيره. So basically he means here, sometimes you can have a person who becomes so engrossed in fear. For example, you become so fearful that you become oblivious. You're not observing anything else, and the only thing that's present to you is you and your fear. That's the only thing that exists right now, you and your fear and nothing else. Right? So some people, they can fall into these kind of situations. Likewise, the same thing can be with hub, with love, and the same thing with raja, with hope. Right? He becomes so preoccupied away from everything else that that's the only thing that exists according to him. Right? So the meaning here then, what is meant here with the second meaning of the word al-fana is that these people are so engrossed in worship and dhikr that they kind of detach themselves from the world. And it's as if you are behaving where the only thing I'm witnessing in Allah's creation is just myself and my feelings and Allah. Right? Now, the issue here is, as we're going to discuss later on, inshallah, is were the companions like this? What's some of the negative consequences of this? Right? What's the negative consequences of this? The Sahaba weren't like this. Like, for example, if you close yourself off from everything and the only thing you have is just raw worship, raw feelings, raw emotions, raw feelings of love, raw feelings of fear, right? And you detach yourself from the world, what you are doing is, like when you observe the world, you have knowledge of the world, right? And you are able to relate what happens in the world to Allah's names and His attributes, to His rububiyyah, right? And so you therefore, you basically have an understanding of His tawheed, and you have an understanding of the world, and you're able to tie what happens, and so therefore you are able to gain strength in your iman, you're able to gain patience, you are able to gain all these things, right? Right, this is very clear. And this is how the Sahaba were. But if you detach yourself, right, and the only thing you are experiencing is worship, dhikr, feelings of love, feelings of fear, feelings of hope, and it's all like just you and your emotions and your Lord, detached from all other things, right, no knowledge of any other thing, right, then it means that you are at a very, very, very big disadvantage, because the things that ought to give you strength of iman, strength of patience, strength of yaqeen, they are missing from you. And the only thing that's working with you is basically emotions, right? Emotion of love, emotion of fear, emotion of hope, and you become, closed off, right? And it's as if nothing exists apart from that which you are feeling and tasting of these emotions and whatever, right? And these are the types of people, like, for example, what happens with these types of people, with this type of scenario is, it's like, in fact, Ibn Taymiyyah discusses this in a short while, but I'll mention it here. You probably heard of things where some guy, he heard the verse of the Quran and he fell down dead out of fear. Right? This now seems to be, this is a praiseworthy thing. This is a great and tremendous thing. This man is so pious that all he had to hear was just one verse of the Quran, and the fear was so much that he dropped down dead. Right? And this is what you find some of the Sufis will use this type of thing. But really, is this really something praiseworthy? Were the Sahaba like this? How many Sahaba do you know who were like this? None. Right? And the reason why this type of thing happened or happens, as it began to happen after the time of the Sahaba, is because the reason why you develop this such a strong, intense reaction or fear or whatever it might be to texts, to verses of the Quran, is because you in your mind, because you were so closed off from the world, and all you are experiencing is raw emotion, raw love, raw fear, right? The strength of it's just you and nothing else. Then when you hear verses, you're not understanding them properly, with reason and with understanding of the world, and so you react in this kind of severe way, right? That doesn't mean this thing now is a sign of extreme piety and this, no, because this was not what the Sahaba were upon. The Sahaba, obviously they worshipped Allah and they engaged in the world, and they linked what happens in the world to Allah's names, to Allah's attributes. They had a good understanding of the world, and they were able to handle calamities. They were able to handle hardships. They heard verses of the Quran. Yes, it made them weep. Yes, it made them repent. Yes, it made them weep. But they didn't start dropping down dead because of some extreme, fear that overtook them all of a sudden. No. This is not from balance. This is not from moderation. This happened to people who came afterwards. And why did this happen? It became because of this faulty, understanding, right, of what is al-fana. What is al-fana? So, Ibn Taymiyyah continues, and he says that these types of people, are such that when they enter into this state of being, they are unable to distinguish what is what and who is who, right? Because it's just raw emotion and feeling, and they become so absorbed that they can't distinguish between who is the loved and who is the beloved. Ibn Taymiyyah mentions an example here. He says, كما يذكر أن رجلا ألقى نفسه في اليم فألقى محبه نفسه خلفه فقال أنا وقعت فما أوقعك خلفي قال غبت بك عني فظننت أنك أنا. Which basically means, he gives an example of, there was a man, and this man fell into the water. He fell into the sea or the ocean. And there was another man who obviously loved him for the sake of Allah. So he threw himself in the water. He then threw himself into the water as well. So the first guy said to this one, look, I fell into the water because I tripped or slipped. But how come you fell into the water? He said that I felt lost without you being there, and I thought that you were me. Because I thought you were me, then I had to jump in with you, because we're one and the same thing, basically, right? So what happens here in this type of situation is that when you become completely detached from all of reality, and the only thing you are, it's like the example of the verse or the mother of Musa alayhi salam, right, where the only thing she was thinking of was Musa alayhi salam, and everything else was totally removed from her heart, right, because that's the only thing that she was thinking of. And it's as if that whole one situation is all that there is, and there's nothing else. So in the same way, these types of people, what happens is that they become so absorbed. They become so absorbed and preoccupied in this, what they call this fana, where everything ceases to exist except you and Allah. Right? Everything ceases to exist except you and Allah. There's nothing else in existence. There's just you and Allah. Right? Until you move from this step and you and Allah become one. You understand, like how it moves from step to step? So first of all, everything perishes, nothing, you don't observe anything apart from just you and Allah. That's all there is in existence, just you and Allah and your raw emotions. And then eventually you and Allah become one and the same thing. You can't distinguish between the two. So this is the danger of where this basically leads to. And as Ibn Taymiyyah says, this topic is where many people, they fell into mistakes here, because they wrongly believed that this is like ittihad. This is like I've now unified with my Lord. Do you understand? Right? So So if you are engrossed just in worship and you forget everything else, you think, I've now become one with my Lord. Right? This is ittihad. This is becoming one. And until he no longer, after a while, makes a distinction between himself and, Allah Azza wa Jal. And so this is where this whole notion of al-ittihad, right, becoming in union with Allah, right? And they start speaking as if like, Isa alayhi salam, Jesus, peace be upon him, is he not in unison with Allah? Is he and Allah not the same thing? He's one with his Lord, right? So in the same way, these people, they went from step to step until they entered into this notion or this idea that because I've been worshipping Allah and I've engrossed with Allah and everything else, I no longer see that there's anything in existence at all. I don't observe anything apart from me and Allah. Now you are basically going and saying, well, I've become in unison with Allah Azza wa Jal, right? And so Ibn Taymiyyah says here that this is obviously a mistake, right? You can't merge with something else, and we know this even in the world. He says, فَإِنَّ الْخَالِقَ لَا يَتَّحِدُ بِهِ شَيْءٌ أَصْلًا. Right? The Creator, Allah, cannot unite with anything at all to begin with. And he says, even with things on this earth, you find that no two things can unite together except when the things they are made of, they change, they undergo transformation and they become a third thing. Like, so what he means here is, for example, if I took this brother here and I took this brother here and I tried to somehow merge them into one and I came up with a third one, that's impossible. That never happens. You can never ever make two entities just combine together, right? This is impossible. This never ever happens, right? You can't. We know from experience this can't happen. So how can someone claim that he's merged with Allah, he's become in unison with Allah? It's not possible. Even in the worldly sense, Ibn Taymiyyah is giving examples. You see, look, you find that water mixes with milk and water mixes with wine and they mix together, right? Yeah, you can find that. That's like a transformation. Or I can give you another example. Like if you take water, flour, sugar, egg, these are all different things, right? You can distinguish. You can say that's flour, water, egg, whatever. You mix them all together. You mix them whatever. Put some yeast in there, and you put it in the oven, and you bake the cake or the bread, and you come out with the bread. This now has gone transformation into a completely new thing. If I said to you, can you take the egg out of that, and can you take the milk out of that, and can you take the water out of that, and you can't do it. It's impossible. Because this now has undergone what they call istihala. This is like transformation, right? So this can happen in created things. You can do that, but you can't just let me take Abdullah here and let me take Zayd over there and let me just merge them together and they've become one now. You can't do that. This doesn't exist. This can't happen. And however, there is a correct meaning, which is that the murad and the mahbub can come together, right? So what this means is that you love something and I love the same thing, right? So the murad and the mahbub, the thing that I want and the thing that I like, is the same as the thing that you want and the thing that you like. This we can speak of as ittihad, right? This we can speak of as there's now unity. They've come together. What do we mean? In desire and in what we seek, right? So for example, this person loves what that person loves, as Ibn Taymiyyah says, and this person hates what this person hates, and this person is pleased with what that person is pleased with, right? And this person dislikes what that person dislikes, and this person allies with the one whom that person allies with, and that person has enmity towards the one whom that person has enmity, right? This now we can say this is like a type of fana, right? In that sense, we can say that yes, the two have become one, right? So he likes something and he likes the same thing. The two have become one, not in the physical essence, but in terms of what they like. This we can speak of. Yes, it's true. But as for this other thing that we are speaking of, the al-fana, which is that you become oblivious to everything else, and the only thing that exists is just you and the thing you are preoccupied with, right? This can lead you to oblivion and to an extreme where you no longer distinguish between yourself and the thing that you've become, engrossed with and attached to, right? This is like the type of fana that we now start entering the mistakes of the Sufis, where we start entering into al-ittihad and eventually wahdatul wujud, as we shall see. Shaykh al-Fawzan comments upon that. And then Ibn Taymiyyah says, look, وَأَكَابِرُ الْأَوْلِيَاء كَأَبِي بَكْرَ وَعُمَرْ وَالسَّابِقِينَ الْأَوَّلِينَ مِنَ الْمُهَاجِرِينَ وَالْأَنصَارِ لَمْ يَقَعُوا فِي هَذَا الْفَنَاءِ. The greatest of the awliya, like Abu Bakr and Umar radiallahu anhuma, and the very first, foremost amongst the companions, the Muhajirin and the Ansar, they did not fall into the likes of this thing. Right? You didn't see Abu Bakr and Umar and other Sahaba doing what the later Sufis and what they fell into, right? You don't see Abu Bakr and Umar and those, Sahaba, just falling down and being overtaken because of hearing the Quran being recited. No, they never fell into any of this, right? That is a sign of deficiency, right? To do those things is a sign of deficiency. Abu Bakr and Umar did not record, nor the Sahaba. No, none of this is reported from them, right? They did not fall into this type of fana here, let alone that we should even entertain the fact that any of the prophets and messengers ever fell into this. No, not the Sahaba didn't fall into this, right? So he says, فضلا أمن هو فوقهم من الأنبياء وإنما وقع شيء من هذا بعد الصحابة. Right? This happened after the time of the Sahaba. And وكذلك كل من كان من هذا النمط كل ما كان من هذا النمط مما فيه غيبة العقل والتمييز لما يرد على القلب من أحوال الإيمان فإن الصحابة رضي الله عنهم كانوا أكمل وأقوى وأثبت في الأحوال الإيمانية من أن تغيب عقولهم أو يحصل لهم غشي أو صعق أو سكر أو فناء أو وله أو جنون. وإنما كان مبادي هذه الأمور في التابعين من عباد البصرة فإنه كان فيهم من يغشى عليه إذا سمع القرآن ومنهم من يموت كأبي جهير الضرير وزرارة بن أوفى قاضي البصرة. It's a long passage, but the essence of what he says here is that this thing did not happen amongst the Sahaba. And these types of things where people, they become overwhelmed by like worship that they are doing or whatever, where they just lose their intellects and they are no longer present in mind, right? They're somewhere else because they've become engrossed in this thing, like what you see the Sufis doing when they do their dhikr and they become lost in their mind. And then he says, then what happens is like certain feelings and states come to them in their hearts, and then maybe they'll lose their intellect, they'll become like kind of intoxicated almost, or they'll faint, or they'll, all these things that you see happening. None of this you saw from the Sahaba at all, right? Because the Sahaba were more perfect and they were strong in like the states of Iman that were present with them. They didn't need to fall into these types of things. And he says, وَإِنَّمَا كَانَ مَبَادِي هَذِهِ الْأُمُورِ فِي التَّابِعِينَ مِنْ عُبَّادِ الْبَصْرَةِ. So this type of thing really it started to appear amongst the tabi'een, right? It happened amongst the tabi'een. And likewise, those people, like, there are stories which are mentioned where, in the prayer, for example, someone passed out and then he died because he was overtaken by the awe and the fear from the recitation of the Quran, right? You don't hear that from the companions. You don't hear it from the companions. You hear it from those people who came afterwards. So the point being, Shaykh al-Fawzan says here, is that this type of thing, this like tasawwuf and whatever, is not known amongst the companions. Rather, it started happening afterwards. After the time of the companions, it began as something small. So at the beginning, people started like thinking, okay, let's get involved in worship, let's detach ourselves from the world, and let's not be put to trial with it, right? It starts off as something good, right? With good intention. And it's like, largely, it's in agreement with the Sharia. There's nothing really wrong we can say, right? Although it's different to what the Sahaba used to do. Right? So you start off with that initial small kind of, movement away from what the Sahaba did, and then from that point onwards, you start seeing that it grows and grows, and then people start, detaching themselves from the world and only being occupied in worship, and then they forget everything else, and step by step, you lead to the situation that we are basically describing. And so, as the Shaykh says, Shaykh Al-Fawzan, هذا في من بعدهم حتى وصل إلى الضلال وإلى الكفر. It started off as something very simple and light, which is, let's just detach from the world, let's be involved in a bit more worship. And it ended up in misguidance and in disbelief. And the Shaykh says, وَكَذَلِكَ الْبِدْعَ. This is the way of innovations in the religion. إِن كَانَتْ فِي أَوَّلِهَا صَغِيرَةً. If they are small at the beginning, فَإِنَّهَا تَؤُولُ إِلَى الشَّرِّ. They eventually turn up and end up in evil. فَالَّذِي يُرِيد الْخَيْرِ وَيُرِيد الْحَقِّ وَالسَّلَامَةِ يتمسك بالكتاب والسنة وما كان عليه السلف الصالح. So whoever wants the truth and safety and wants to hold on to the book and the sunnah, then let him hold on to the book and the sunnah and what the salaf were upon. So I think what we can do is we can end our lesson at this point here, inshallah. Obviously we haven't come to the third type yet. The third is the most evil type. Right? We'll discuss that in the next lesson, inshallah ta'ala. But just to summarize here then, as we said, the general lesson that we want to take from here is that you can see how mistakes in principles of the religion, such as not distinguishing between what Allah loves and is pleased with and between what He decrees, right? That itself can be the source of tremendous misguidance, reaching the level of disbelief itself. And this can also be seen when it comes to when we start hearing certain terms and words which are being used by people. As you know, many of the Sufis use these terms: al-fana, al-shari'a, al-haqiqa, al-zahir, al-batin. These are all terms that they use, right? Perishing, and the sharia, the outer reality and the inner reality, right? And things like that. These words can be kind of impregnated with meanings which can be false and which can be correct. And so here Ibn Taymiyyah has given us an illustration with one example called al-fana. Al-fana. This is, you find it in the books of the Sufis. They'll speak of al-fana, that I want to perish and become one with my Lord. I want to perish and become one with my Lord. Well, okay, hold on a minute. What do you mean now? You want to perish and you want to become one with your Lord. What exactly do you mean? Do you mean that you want all your desires to perish, so that the only thing that you desire is that which is wajib and mustahab? Is that what you mean? In that case, that's fine. Or do you mean, I want to perish and become one with my Lord, in the sense that nothing else exists to me except just me and my Lord, and I'm going to detach myself from everything, and the only thing is me, my feelings, and my Lord? Is that what you mean? This is a mistake, and it's going to lead you to misguidance. Or do you mean, I want to, completely perish and not see myself as anything other than my Lord? Meaning, I am my Lord, and my Lord is me, and I don't want to see myself as being, separate from Him. This now is wahdatul wujud, the third one. If that's what you mean, this is outright kufr and disbelief. It's worse disbelief than the disbelief of the Jews and the Christians, if that's what you mean. Do you understand? So the words are very important for us to understand. And here Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah is just giving us an illustration by way of the word al-fana. So what we'll do is we'll end our lesson here, inshallah ta'ala. And I think this is the last lesson. I think we don't have it's the last lesson, inshallah. So the next lesson won't be till the start of the 9th, which will be the second weekend of January, inshallah. So we'll continue from this point onwards. We are looking at the third type of al-fana, inshallah. And just before we finish, I think I'll finish. Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Stop that.